wie tröstlich ist, oje, wie glücklich dies. Oje,
Johann Strauss achieved something in his artistic life that few others have been able to. His music became the soundtrack to an entire era. Together with his father and brothers, he shaped the music of Vienna for almost a century. As a sympathizer of the March Revolution, he became a bourgeois icon of the 19th century, and with the breathtaking development of the Strauss family business, he revolutionized the business model of classical music. His path to the top was accompanied by family tensions. While he was in constant conflict with his father and brothers, his rise would have been unimaginable without the three influential women in his life. Behind the facade of the brilliant orchestra conductor and composer lay a multifaceted personality. Who was Johann Strauss and which places and people shaped him? A biographical approach to the artist of the century from Austria. Johann Strauss' biography begins before his birth, with the story of his father. After the long, difficult years of the Napoleonic Wars, Vienna longed for pleasure and lightheartedness. People wanted to forget the oppressive repression of the Metternich monarchy, and with the gradual improvement of the financial situations in the 1820s, they flocked to the popular coffee houses, which almost always also had ballrooms. 320,000 people lived in Vienna at that time, and it was said that on some evenings, a quarter of them were out dancing. In the mid-20s, Johann Strauss Sr. and Josef Lanner were the most famous musicians playing, and the two played in the same band. The most important dance hall in Vienna was the Sperl, and Strauss succeeded in becoming the music director there. He then founded his own band on his own account and began to use the Sperl as his base, becoming the Waltz King of Vienna. Strauss Sr. did not invent the waltz, but with his composition and his bands, he turned it into exhilarating, ecstatic dance music. His performances were accompanied by breathtaking productions conceived by his congenial partner Hirsch. In 1846, he is said to have illuminated the ballroom with 50,000 candles during a ball. During carnival weeks, Strauss had his musicians perform in different venues simultaneously and drove from venue to venue in the evenings in a horse-drawn carriage. Strauss was not only a musical genius, but also a tough businessman. He threatened many cafe house owners that his musicians would no longer perform in their venues if they allowed other bands to play in between. He constantly composed new works for the many balls and soon went on tour with his orchestra to take on lucrative engagements. Due to his father's frequent absences, his son Johann was never able to form a close bond with him. But Johann admired his father and he became his great role model. But let's go back to the year 1825. Johann Strauss Sr. had met the innkeeper's daughter Maria Streim. Their firstborn son Johann was the product of a presumably unplanned pregnancy and became the eldest of 5 children. After each subsequent birth, the family moved until they finally found a permanent home in the Hirschenhaus near the Sperl. His father did not want his children to follow in his footsteps, as the profession of musician was poorly regarded and even worse paid. But with constant composing, practicing and rehearsing going on at home, the children quickly caught the music bug. All 3 sons would later become musicians. Johann, known as Shani to his family, learned to play the piano and, with his mother's support, was able to take violin lessons in secret. he composed his first waltz at the age of 6 in his grandparents' country cottage. At the age of 14, Johann transferred to high school and then began studying at the Polytechnic Institute. But his life took a sudden turn. In 1835, his father moved in with his mistress Emily Trampusch, who had just given birth to his first child, with 7 more to follow. Johann's mother had just given birth to her 6th child and was furious when she learned of Johann's extramarital affair. Anna was a self-confident and intelligent person, and she decided to take revenge in her own way. She now promoted her eldest son's musical talents in order to make him a direct competitor to his father. Johann made great progress in his lessons and was enthusiastic about his mother's plan. When his father's great rival, Josef Lanner, died in 1843, the two sensed their chance. Together they applied for official permission to perform in public. The father tried to prevent the permit from being granted, but he was unsuccessful. The two had already found a venue. Dommeyer, belonging to the godfather of Johann's brother Eduard, made his restaurant in Hitzing available to them. In the same year, the 20-year-old Strauss' first performance was a great success. The program already included many of his own compositions. The euphoric start was followed by harsh reality. On the one hand, he had a lot to learn as a composer and conductor, and his mother provided him with experienced orchestra musicians to assist him. The first bad reviews were also inevitable. At the same time, his father's threats had an effect. Many dance halls did not dare to hire his son, and Johann had increasing difficulty getting performances. During this difficult phase, Johann worked like a man possessed. During the following carnival season, he played at 76 balls in 7 weeks, almost every day until 6 a.m. Since the established, wealthier Viennese remained loyal to the older Strauss, the younger Strauss deliberately sought to appeal to the middle and lower class, including many Viennese of Slavic origin. To make matters worse, Vienna slid into an economic crisis the following year. The venues cancelled their planned carnival engagements, and within a very short time, the band found itself with almost no performance. To get through this difficult period, Johann hastily organized a tour of the eastern countries of the Danube monarchy, which even took him through the Carpathian Mountains in the freezing cold of winter. This Hungary winter of 47-48 was the last straw politically, and in 1848 revolution broke out in Vienna. Strauss learned of this during his tour in Budapest, and, full of revolutionary zeal, he and 14 other men armed with swords stormed the Austrian consulate and demanded the consul's abdication. This operetta-like action failed, of course, but it showed that Johann's heart was with the revolutionaries, and he wrote the Revolutionary March, which became the anthem of the revolutionaries in Vienna. His father, on the other hand, remained loyal to the emperor and composed his most famous work, the Radetzky March. The Viennese mockingly called the Radetzky March the better march for the worse cause. When the imperial troops had suppressed the uprisings in the course of the year, Strauss' son had lost the emperor's favor. His attempt to regain it was to become his affliction for the next 50 years. In 1849, Johann Strauss Sr. died at the age of only 45. Tens of thousands lined the streets as the funeral procession made its way through Vienna. Johann subsequently attempted to regain the emperor's favor with various commemorative compositions, but the emperor was not prepared to forgive him. Nevertheless, Johann's career progressed rapidly. He courageously took over his father's Orpheum band and thus expanded the Strauss Company, which he ran together with his mother. And with the Annen Polka, he had his first big hit in 1852. But the enormous pressure of work soon took its toll. Visitors expected new compositions at every ball. Johann was always expected to conduct the orchestra, and the management task of leading several bands was a millstone around his neck. After a few years, Johann was burned out. He had to take repeated breaks, and his spa stays became more frequent. The family decided that his brother Joseph should join the company. Joseph was a talented engineer and had continued his musical education on a part-time basis, making a successful debut at the Sperl in 1853. It was a stroke of luck for the family that Joseph became a gifted and prolific composer. In 1855, the youngest brother, Edward, also joined the family business, initially as an orchestra musician. The three brothers, supported by their business-minded mother, soon dominated the Viennese dance halls. They did not shy away from intimidating event organizers or bribing journalists and became a veritable waltz mafia. In the 1850s, the image of old Vienna began to disappear. With the demolition of the defense wall and the construction of the Ringstraße, Vienna became a 10-year construction site and the railway age began. The Strauss family wrote the Bahnfrei Waltz as the soundtrack to this era. The next 10 summer months belonged to Pawlowsk, an amusement palace built by the Russian Railway Company. As an attraction, it hired the Strauss Orchestra to lure a wealthy guests to the station 30 kilometers from St. Petersburg. The strategy worked, and Strauss became the attraction that the railway company had hoped for. The gossip columns also got their money's worth. The dashing Strauss became the attraction of the ladies, and it is said that he brought a black poodle to Russia every summer to satisfy the demand for curls. In the summer of 1858, he made the acquaintance of the Russian Olga Smirnitskaya. This did not go unnoticed in Vienna, and rumors began to circulate in the magazine Trittstratsch that Strauss had gotten married. Strauss reacted confidently and countered with the Trittstratsch polka. Strauss was able to make important contacts in Pawlowsk, including often playing music for the Tsar and Tsarina, and he met Tchaikovsky, who certainly found inspiration for his wonderful ballet waltzes in Strauss' music. In 1862, the time had come. Strauss ended his bachelorhood and married Henriette Trefts, known as Jetty. For Viennese society, this was tantamount to a minor scandal. Jetty was a woman with a past, having already had 7 illegitimate children with 3 different men, and so the wedding ceremony in St. Stephen's Cathedral took place not in white, but in simple street clothes. More important to Strauss was that Jetty had musical expertise in addition to charm. She was a trained opera singer and had even once appeared on stage with the famous Schröder de Vriend. She was 44 years old, he was 37, and she affectionately called him Bub or boy. That didn't seem to bother Johann because he probably saw Jetty as a mother figure who would take care of him. So the intelligent Jetty soon became his manager. Johann valued her advice, she negotiated engagements and cultivated many international contacts. Jetty also tastefully furnished their new home, which was only a few steps away from the Domeyer in Hietzing. There, Strauss found inspiration and peace to compose. Jetty gave her husband the freedom that enabled him to enter the next phase of his career, his rise to become the Waltz King. The official beginning of this rise was his appointment as Imperial Court Ball music director by Emperor Franz Joseph. The emperor had created this title especially for Strauss Sr. in 1846. Now the son was allowed to proudly take it over. Although it did not confer any privileges, the title was symbolically worth its weight in gold. His most famous composition from the waltz decade is probably the Blue Danube Waltz. Originally written for choir, the Danube Waltz soon became Vienna's musical calling card, even though the Danube floodplains at that time were a marshy area outside Vienna that reflected all colors but never blue. In 1866, the imperial army suffered a devastating defeat at Königgrätz. Vienna fell into a state of shock and many restaurants remained closed. Strauss accepted an invitation from the wife of the Austrian ambassador in Paris, Pauline Metternich. She wanted to present a strong Austria to the world and organized a lavish party in the embassy garden. She hired Strauss as an attraction, and the event with his orchestra caused a great sensation. When Strauss sent the Parisians into a waltz frenzy in a tent at the subsequent Paris World's Fair, and then the Londoners at the proms, Strauss finally became an Austrian icon abroad and began to trim his beard in a statesmanlike manner. His father's dance waltzes had developed into his son's artistic waltzes, absolute music that could also be danced to. Pieces in which, as a conductor, he expected the audience neither to eat nor to dance. Listeners described Strauss as a conductor with a formidable sense of tempo, in which each bar had its own tempo. As the quality of his composition increased, so did the recognition he received from his colleagues. Brahms, who had chosen Vienna as his home, held him in particularly high esteem, and the two men enjoyed meeting up in the somerset of Ischl to play cards together. It was an open secret that there was no harmony between the 3 Strauss brothers. Eduard suffered from the fact that Joseph and Johann were the better composers, and that he was the second Strauss all his life. Especially outside Vienna, he was often confused with Johann, which hurt him deeply. Johann, on the other hand, was jealous of the good looks of dashing Eddie and rarely allowed him to enjoy his successes. When Eduard later took over the band on his own responsibility, he enjoyed it when Johann had to beg him to occasionally play pieces from his operettas. Joseph suffered from the fact that Johann was the better conductor and remained the audience favorite. It often happened that organizers declined concerts if only Joseph was to conduct. Nevertheless, Johann and Joseph got together and wrote the cheerful Pizzicato polka in Pawlowsk. In 1870, their mother Anna died. She had played a major role in the family's financial success, and with her death, the unofficial head of the family passed away. For Johann, Jetty's support now became all the more valuable. A few months earlier, Joseph had tried to establish himself in Warsaw on his own account, partly to gain some distance from Johann. But the venture turned into an organizational nightmare. Joseph was a chain smoker and drank coffee by the liter. His health was already poor, and his mother's death had taken its toll on him. When chaos broke out in the orchestra during a concert in Warsaw due to a mistake in the score, he suffered a severe heart attack, to which he succumbed shortly thereafter. Meanwhile, Jetty had set her sights on musical theatre. Since the early 1860s, Offenbach had also been gaining popularity in Vienna, and he became the subject of the Offenbach mania when Marie Geistinger appeared in Offenbach's operetta The Beautiful Helena and caused a scandal. She was not beautiful, but she was willing to show her legs, and her low-cut skirt became the talk of Vienna. The theater director summed up his concept: a lot on stage and little on the body. In order to win Johann Strauss over to operetta, Jetty and the director of the Theater an der Wien, Franz Steiner, devised a ruse. Jetty secretly copied a few of her husband's works, and Steiner had suitable lyrics written for them. Together, the two presented the result to Strauss in the empty Theater an der Wien. Johann Strauss was enthusiastic and agreed. But he found it difficult to get started. He lacked any theatrical experience, and his knowledge of literature and librettos was modest. Strauss was not a man of books, but one of billiard balls and playing cards. Therefore, he was assisted by the experienced theater conductor Richard Chenet, who played a decisive role in shaping the first operetta works. Strauss often provided the themes and melodies, while Chenet developed them into finished scores. In 1871, the Viennese public eagerly awaited the performance. Strauss had already had his orchestra perform individual pieces, and even more importantly, Geistinger was given the female lead role. Indigo and the 40 Thieves was a hit and was performed 70 times. From then on, Strauss turned his attention mainly to operetta. His next operetta, Carnival in Rome, was also a success. But the work that would outshine all of Strauss' other operettas came to the stage in 1874, Die Fledermaus, the Bat. Once again, Strauss composed the melodies and Chenet orchestrated them. Within a very short time, Strauss conjured up half a dozen immortal melodies, and the Bat made Strauss immortal as an operetta composer. However, a stock market crash had taken place a few months before the premiere, and the good mood was subdued when Strauss himself stood at the conductor's podium and Geistinger once again sang the female lead. The big breakthrough for Die Fledermaus came with the subsequent production in Paris. With this, Strauss finally took over the crown of the king of operetta from Jacques Offenbach in the French capital, who had fallen out of favor in France as a German after the Franco-Prussian War. 3 years after the bat, his wife Jetty died. By this point, their relationship had already cooled somewhat, and Johann had become estranged from Jetty, who had become matronly. Nevertheless, she remained his tireless factotum and manager until the end. But Strauss did not remain alone for long. Just 2 months later, he stood at the altar with Lili Dietrich. Strauss hoped that Lili, like his mother and his first wife before her, would continue to run the business. But Lili was not in Jetty's league. The Viennese later mocked that the subsequent failure of his operetta, The Blind Cow, would certainly not have happened to Jetty. Lili was interested in social glamour and disappointed that Johann preferred to compose in peace rather than participate in sophisticated Viennese life. She began an affair with the director of the theatre an der Wien, and when Johann Strauss learned of the affair with the theatre director Steiner, he wanted to prevent his new work, A Night in Venice, from being performed at this theatre. He did not succeed, but he did at least manage to have the premiere take place in Berlin. When composing, Strauss was disappointed to find, as he had with previous works, that the libretto was weak. Once again, Chenet and Zell were the librettists, both of whom were writers in their spare time. Chenet's main profession was a conductor, and Zell was a Danube ship captain. This came back to haunt them at the premiere when the audience made fun of the text. At night the cats are grey and they mew tenderly.
Nachts sind die Katzen ja grau, nachts tönt es zärtlich miau, nur wenn der Mond dazu scheint.
Meanwhile, a new woman had entered Strauss' life. Strauss knew Adele Strauss, née Deutsch, from earlier, and she now filled the void that Jetty's death had left in Strauss' life, becoming Johann's life partner and manager. Strauss now wanted to throw himself into his next project. He dreamed of writing a work for the opera, but so far he had not succeeded in gaining access to the court opera. Adele's first achievement was to ensure that Chenet and Zell lost their role as librettists. She introduced Strauss to a Hungarian writer, and the result was The Gypsy Baron. It was the first theatre project he wrote without Chenet's help, and thus became the composer's triumph. However, even with this work, access to the court opera remained denied, as Strauss soon realized himself that the work was only suitable for operetta.
Ja, das Schreiben und das Lesen ist nie mein Fach gewesen, denn schon von Kindesbeinen befasste ich mich mit Schweinen.
The role of the pig dealer, Zupan, was a dream role for the new star of Strauss operetta, Alexander Girardi. Alexander Girardi became a favorite of the Viennese through The Gypsy Baron, and a fixture in upcoming Strauss operettas.
Eine Hold mit Augen blau, mit Goldhaar, hieß Pamela. War sie eines anderen Frau, das ist ja doch kein Fehler. Auf einem Balle fragt sich sie, sind in der Ehe Sie glücklich? Ach nein, sprach sie, doch sag ich's nicht, das wäre gar nicht schicklich.
Strauss and Adele were not only compatible in their private lives, but also professionally. And Strauss asked the emperor for permission to divorce so that he could marry Adele. When the emperor refused his request, Strauss decided to take Saxon citizenship. He married Adele in the presence of the Duke of Saxe-Coburg, shocking his Viennese homeland with this move. Contemporaries described Strauss as a peculiar man with many quirks. Although he was the Waltz King, he never danced. He composed for cafes and ballrooms for years, but never went there himself. His phobia of sunlight was notorious. He preferred to compose at night or when it was raining. In the early 1890s, his health began to deteriorate. At the age of 70, he was no longer able to conduct his operas himself. His eyes were too weak, and recurring attacks of rheumatism took their toll on him. After the Gypsy Baron, he wrote around half a dozen operettas. However, he was unable to repeat the success of the Gypsy Baron or even Die Fledermaus, and they found their audience mainly thanks to the popularity of Alexander Girardi. Shortly before his death, the business-minded Adele launched the last operetta project. Under the title Viennese Blood, Adolf Müller arranged an operetta from existing works by Strauss. Popular instrumental pieces were given new lyrics in some cases, and Strauss was only involved in an advisory capacity. Viennese Blood became a beautiful retrospective of Johann Strauss' work. Johann Strauss died of pneumonia in 1899 at the age of 73. He was led to rest in Vienna's Central Cemetery amid great sympathy from Viennese population.